Hello guys, I hope I'm audible. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to each one of you joining from India, Middle East, and other parts of the world. Today we are on the share.
You're audible. You're audible.
Yeah, thanks, Cecily. So today we are on the third session of our biomedical engineering training course. So today's topic is defibrillation advanced, and we are running it jointly with the Post Biomedical Group. We thank for Post Biomedical Group to circulating the link for these training sessions. Today's agenda is, so I'm the host for the today's session. My name is Tarun Gupta. I'm the product and marketing team member in India. So today's session is being given by me. First session 3A, so defibrillator advanced. Then after my session, Mr. Cyril George will talk about the selection criteria of defibrillators in the hospital. Then Mr. Mukesh Rani, who is a customer support manager in Nikonkulam, India, will talk about the maintenance and troubleshooting, SSS management in the for the defibrillators in the hospital. Then we will have at last question and answers session. So before we proceed, let's summarize the last session. Last session we had approx 700 attendees, and many of you have still requested for presentation file. Actually, we are going to upload these videos, the session videos on Post Biomedical YouTube channel, and soon you will find more videos or on their channel. Okay, and it works in our attendees registration and invites works in a similar way. Whoever attendees will join the this session, like in this session, will get the link for the next session. Okay, and at last on the 10th session we will run the quiz and we will have a certification program. Now let's start with the defibrillation advance. So, agenda is we will talk about the synchronized cardioversion. We will talk about the non-invasive transcutaneous pacing function. Many defibs are, they're coming with a CPR feedback system. There's a requirement of 12 ECG transmission, capnography, and so on. Now, before I move further to synchronized cardioversion, let's talk about defibrillation. I think we have discussed in our last two sessions about defibrillation. Defibrillation is also called as a asynchronized cardioversion. Okay, and its main function is to terminate ventricular fibrillation or pulseless ventricular tachycardia. Okay, so pulseless. So defibrillation can be given to the to the patient without any synchronization. Then this comes the word synchronized cardioversion. Synchronized means we are giving the defibrillation to the patient, but it is synchronized. Synchronized with the we are synchronizing it with the ECG waveform or patient own ECG. So this is done during the atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter, ventricular tachycardia. I will tell you. Next slide. So synchronization, we are giving the direct DC current discharge, and we are discharging at the point of R wave in the ECG cycle. Okay, why we are synchronizing it with the R wave is just to prevent the shock, during the repolarization phase of ventricles. When ventricles are getting relaxed, we should not give the shock at that time. If we give the shock at the repolarization phase of ventricles, it may lead to the ventricular fibrillation. Okay, so that's why we need to synchronize it with R wave. And what are the indications of synchronized cardioversion? At what ECG cycles we need to do the synchronized cardioversion is first, as per the advanced cardiac life support guidelines, any patient with narrow or wide QRS complex tachycardia, it means pulse ventricular tachycardia with pulse. Okay, And to narrow a wide QRS complex, more than ventricular rate is where heart rate is more than 150 BPM. Patient who is unstable should be given immediate treatment with the synchronized electrical cardioversion. Or a patient with atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter, or monomorphic ventricular tachycardia with pulses. Monomorphic means the patient is having the similar morphology of ECG cycle, QRS complexes in the ventricular tachycardia arrhythmias. So during these type of arrhythmias and during these type of conditions, we need to give the synchronized cardioversion. Here is example of atrial fibrillation. You can see there is no P wave, okay, or the P wave is there, so that is a very irregular P wave. But the QRS complex is there. A patient can be alive with the atrial fibrillation. It's not so dangerous because as per atrias are above the ventricles. 75% of the blood is automatically when it's filled with the veins, pulmonary vein or the central venous. So atrials are already 75% of blood which is there in atria, it goes to the ventricles. But only at the time of the patient is doing some exercise, some stress is there. At that time, the patient may have some problem. Okay, so atrial fibrillation can be a plan. Doctor clinician they can plan to do the synchronized cardioversion, and for giving this cardioversion, there are some requirements are there. They need to bring the crash cart near to the patient. The patient is catheterized with the IV line, and they have been given the sedative drugs to the patient. The patient are relaxed with some drugs, and some painkillers are also given to the patient. Okay, because cardioversion is a painful procedure, so some drugs are given to the patient, and we need to give the cardioversion. We need to bring a device which is a defibrillator near to the patient. Now, how to give the synchronized cardioversion? Here, this is the for Nihon quadrant defibrillator. We need to first select the energy from this rotary knob, and here is the button of sync button. You can see in this picture. So we just need to press the sync button, and on the defibrillator screen, you will get a confirmation message that sync mode is on. Okay, and when the sync button is pressed, you will get the you will see these lines over the R wave. It means defibrillator is able to recognize the QRS wave. So when these lines are start coming, and you select the energy, press the charge it, and discharge from the paddles. Defibrillator automatically will give the discharge on the R wave. Okay, and patient is revived from the atrial fibrillation. So this is how synchronized cardioversion is given to the patient. Okay, if you guys have any question, just put the on the chat box or in the question and answers blog. So we will run the question and answer session later on. Okay. Now coming to the transcutaneous pacing. Transcutaneous pacing, there are many names for transcutaneous pacing. Some says non-invasive pacing, some call it external pacing. Okay, so basically we are connecting two pads. We are touching two pads. Transcutaneous means we are touching two. Cutaneous means skin. So we are attaching two pads over the patient chest, over the patient's skin, and we are giving the electrical stimulation to the patient heart, to the externally to these electrodes. Okay, so these electrodes are same electrodes which are used for the AED or for the defibrillation. Okay, and one main function, main intention is to give the stimulation to cause the cardiac depolarization and the myocardial, the heart muscles contraction. Okay, and it is given when the patient own pacemaker, natural pacemaker SA node is not able to give the enough stimulation to the heart to from. That condition is called as sinus bradycardia. In the sinus bradycardia, for patient own heart rate, it goes down to the 40, 50. Okay, so less than 60, patient may call it as a bradycardia. Okay, and maybe because of some Bundle branches, if we have learned about the heart, there are some Purkinje fibers are there, bundle branches are there. So if there is some connection problem with the connection issues with the those branches, so those may lead to the high degree block. So second degree block it called as third degree block. Okay. So in those cases, tracing is required. And in other cases like atrial fibrillation also with slow ventricular response and bradycardia, pacing is required. And the defibrillator, so we have the pacing function, and it's a external pacing is used as a emergency procedure. So there are two modes for giving the pacing. First mode, we have two modes on the rotary knob. You can select. You can see here on the with the rotary knob only. You can select either the fixed mode or the demand mode. So there are two modes for the pacing. Okay. Uh, fixed mode, fixed mode. In the fixed mode, the pacing current is output at the selected pacing rate. Whatever the clinician has set the pacing rate or pacing current, regardless of the patient's own heartbeat, it will give the stimulation to the patient. Okay, so there is no synchronization with the patient own ECG. But in the demand mode, as the word say demand, whenever there is a demand of pacing, the defibrillator will give the external, pacing to the stimulation to the patient. Okay, so there is a preset level set like if it goes on 50, the defibrillator will give the pacing to the patient. Or if there is no spontaneous heartbeat, then only in those cases pacing is given to the patient. Okay, and here in demand mode, the patient ECG, it is synchronized with the patient own heart rate, and patient ECG is monitored the patient. Now here is the procedure of giving the transcutaneous pacing. If you see your defibrillator, first you need to select the rotating knob to the fixed mode or demand mode. And here on the left side of the front panel, we have a pacing, buttons are there or keys are there. It's a start stop key, pacing rate selection increasing and decreasing, pacing output, milliampere increasing or decreasing. So we have some keys over there. So how to give the procedure? First, you need to select, turn the dial knob to the fixed mode or the demand mode. Then you need to set the pacing rate. Okay, and before you have to start pacing, you need to check if the current is in the 0 mA level. Okay, then after attaching the ECG electrode, ECG leads, the main lead, you need to select the second lead. Select the second lead here, and when you start, then you need to start it. When you press the start button, you will find some white lines over here on the ECG. Okay, and it indicates that defibrillator is able to recognize the QRS waveform. Okay, then you slowly increase the current to the patient, and pacing is being given to the patient. Okay, so this is the set heart rate, and this is the pacing current which is set. For example, it's a 30 or 40 heart rate is there, 40 let's say. So you have to start from the 0, then you to next is the 8 mA, then it's 10 mA, 20 mA. Then slowly you need to increase the current. So just check whether the set heart rate and the patient heart rate is synchronization. When our patient heart rate has come to the 80, what you have said, then you need to stop the increasing the current there. And when the pacing is given to the patient, you can see the marks over here. Okay, at the bottom of the ECG, it means pacing is being given to the patient, and on the here the indicator is there, a pulse indicator. So when the pacing is given to the patient, this indicator will blink. So you can get the confirmation the pacing is being given by the defibrillator. And at last, you can press this button to stop the pacing. Okay, so this is how the transcranial external pacing works. Now, the third topic is on the CPR feedback. So you guys know, we have learned in the first session about the CPR, and in the second session also Mr. Sunil will explain about the CPR, importance of CPR. So what are the critical components of a CPR, of effective CPR? First, we need to minimize the interruption in the chest compressions. We need to provide compressions at adequate rate and depth. Okay, and we need to avoid leaning between the compression. Leaning means we have to be straight. Okay, we should not be lean on the patient. It should be straight. We should be our arms to perpendicular to the patient chest, and we need to avoid excessive ventilation. Only two breaths are allowed, two or three. You cannot give. You should not give them more, breaths to the patient. And what it may cause, if there is interruption in the CPR, then it can lead to the loss of number of chest compression, obviously, and number of chest compression delivered per minute during CPR is important determinant of ROSC. ROSC stands for return of spontaneous circulation. Okay, and survival with good neurological function. Even if patient is revived after cardiac arrest, it has been patient has been okay, but if we have not given the good CPR to the patient, patient may have some neurological problem, neurological pain, tissue may die. Okay, so you need to provide effective CPR so that it may have a patient may have good neurological function after cardiac arrest. Okay, and now you see there are some now new guidelines from AHA, 2015 guidelines of AHA. It says for effective CPR, it is reasonable that you should use audio visual feedback device during CPR for real-time estimation of CPR performance, and ERC, which is a European Resuscitation Council. So they also say directive CPR feedback devices are useful for improving compression rate, depth, base, and hand position. So nowadays the defibrillators are also coming with the CPR feedback function, and with the recommendation for CPR, the rate should be 100 to 120 per minute. Depth is 2 6. You need to make sure the chest is recoiling. You are after each compression you are making the chest recoil, and you need to minimize the interruption. So as I said, many nowadays defibrillators are getting advanced and they're coming with the feedback devices. So this is a CPR feedback device. This is a CPR 1100. Okay, it's a very handy device. It just comes in your palm. It can be used as a standalone device. Okay, so while you can directly use on the patient chest. Okay, you just need to switch it on and keep it on the patient who needs the CPR. Just keep it under the palm. So if you need to synchronize your CPR with the Odos light, and if you're giving a good CPR, good compression, it will give the blue indicator, blue light, blue indicator. So we do synchronize with the CPR with the Odos light, and if good compressions are there, then blue light will be. Okay, and it has a voice prompt. In case you are leaning, you are not giving the good CPR, or you are giving the too fast CPR, so it will guide you. It has a voice prompt to slow down the rate or to make the patient horizontal or do the fast compressions. Okay. Now it can be used. I told you it can be used as standalone, and it can be used with our defibrillator. So it has a Bluetooth, communication. It can be connected via Bluetooth to the defibrillator, and you can see the data of CPR compression on the screen. Okay, so it is 0 level and it's a 50 to 70. So you can see the compression waveform. Okay, you need to make sure it goes like this. Okay, the compression waveform. You need to recoil and you need to compress it, and you need to completely recoil. And you can see the CPR depth on the screen and CPR rate. Okay, so you have an audio, visual, CPR feedback device on the defibrillator. Now the same CPR 1100, it can be used for the training. Okay, so it comes with a software that you can download in your PC, and you can if you are, if you want to train someone or you want to run a training session, so this CPR feedback device will help you. Okay, so this is software for the CPR training, and you need to make sure the connection is there with the Bluetooth, and you can press the, you can use the CPR over the normal mannequin, CPR mannequin, give the compression, and it will show the compression waveform over here and indicator over there. Okay, and at last you can report, take a printout of the training report. Okay. So there are three functions of this CPR feedback device. You can use as a standalone, you can use it with a defibrillator, and you can use it as a training device. Okay. Now there are other parameters like 12 lead ECG, transmission, capnography, SpO2, NIVP, and IVP. Now, earlier defibrillator was a very simple defibrillator. It was only able to monitor ECG. Nowadays, in the ambulances, the demand is getting more. It should not use too many devices. And on the ambulance, so if you keep defibrillator, you can keep a monitor. So there are two devices are there. Now, the demand is market demand is trend is coming. It's a single device with the function of defibrillation and the patient monitor. So we have and there is a demand of 12 lead ECG transmission. So why 12 lead ECG transmission is required? So it is it's getting mandatory while transporting the patient from the ambulance to the transporting a patient from the ambulance. Now it is getting mandatory to send the 12 lead ECG waveform and the interpretation data to the hospital before the patient arrives at the hospital. Okay, so this we call it STEMA to find the STEMA transmission. Like ST stands for the ST values of PQRST, ST of the each lead. EME stands for elevated myocardial infarction. So ST elevated myocardial infarction, to know before patient arrives at the hospital that patient is having STME or not. Okay, so it is recommended, it is getting mandatory that 12 lead patient 12 lead ECG should be transmitted to the hospital before patient arrives. Okay, so why it is required? It is required to reduce the to reduce the door to balloon time and to reduce the delay of reperfusion therapy. Okay, and the stenosis of acute coronary syndrome, which can be recovered by early reperfusion therapy, which is PCI. So reperfusion therapy stands for the medical treatment to restore blood flow either through or around blocked arteries. If patient is having some MI, myocardial infarction, the patient artery may get blocked. Okay, to reduce, and patient may have a heart attack. To reduce the time to open those arteries. Okay, so the patient may not die, and to reduce the myocardial ischemia time. So patient should be given taken to the cath lab urgently, and patient should be recovered by using the PCI. The PCI stands for coronary intervention, coronary interventions. Okay, so angioplasty or angiography. So those arteries and those blocked arteries are opened by by ballooning or by putting a stent in between. Okay. Now the solution to reduce the door to balloon time is we can send the defibrillator using the ambulance. We can send the defibrillator data via Bluetooth to the mobile, and mobile or any Android devices which is there in the ambulance with the technician. So technician can send that file to the hospital via email. So in the hospital they can open the ECG, ECG of the patient before patient arrives. Okay. Now, in emergency, in a situation or before patient arrives in the hospital, so the parameter staff or clinicians who are there, they may hyperventilate the patient. Okay, they may use the ambu bag and they may hyperventilate the patient. So hyperventilation to the patient might lead to the hypoxia. Means the CO2, the oxygen is increased in the patient and the CO2 has been gone down. So what's the, if we give excessive ventilation to the patient, hyperventilation, it increases the intrathoracic pressure, okay, which can lead to the reduced coronary perfusion, or you can say reduced cardiac output. Okay, and similarly, if the cardiac output is reduced, it can, it may affect the cerebral perfusion also. Okay, so the EtCO2 should be in the range of 35 to 40. And this is how ambu bag is used to give the ventilation to the patient. They should not be patient should not be hyperventilated or hypoventilated. It should be appropriate. So you should EtCO2 is a device, is a parameter which will help you in uh, optimizing your manual ventilation. You can see from here in this graph, if CO2 is not monitored, so most of the CO2 values will be in the less. Patient is hyperventilated and the CO2 is coming in the range of 15 to 25. Okay, it's not increasing to 30 to 40, and the target of the CO2 is 35 to 40. Okay, now if we measure CO2 on display, paramedic staff or clinician, they are able to see the CO2 waveform and the CO2 value on the screen. They can manage the CO2 at 35 to 40 mmHg. Okay, so CO2, EtCO2 is very important in optimizing your manual ventilation. Okay, and it has been recommended by ALCOR, which is the International Consensus on Cardiopulmonary Resuscitation. So, and this it comes under the guideline of THA 2010 guidelines, and the ERC guidelines also, European Resuscitation Council. They also recommended the usage of CO2 with waveform on the screen. Okay, and there are three main other purposes of monitoring capnography is to confirm tactile tube position. Okay, in case in emergency situation in the ambulance also, or in the trauma and trauma care, okay, PIH, the patient needs to intubated. So EtCO2 is the only parameter which will which will tell you that patient has been intubated and it has been well intubated. Okay. The second thing is it will help you. It is an early indicator of ROSC. ROSC stands for return of spontaneous circulation. Okay, so you can see in this graph, patient was under the cardiac ventricular fibrillation, and the CO2 was in the range of less than 25. If ROC has been achieved, the EtCO2 will suddenly goes up and it will show in the range of 35 to 40. Okay, and it will help you in the knowing the quality of your CPR. If CPR is good, then the CO2 value will be in the range of 10 to 20. And if CPR is not good, then CO2 will be less than 10 mmHg. Okay, so EtCO2 is very important while you are resuscitation the patient. Now we have a advanced EtCO2 monitor module. This is we are having the mainstream EtCO2 sensor, which is which we call as a CAP1, and it's the world's smallest, lightest, and the most durable EtCO2 sensor. And we can use on both intubated and non-intubated patient. And in the emergency situation, not all patients will have a ET2. Okay, so you need a EtCO2 monitor. So this is your EtCO2. It can be used on non-intubated patient, and you can ensure the quality of CPR. With this EtCO2. Okay, so I'm completing my presentation with this slide, and thank you. Now I would like to invite Mr. Sunil George, who is a Deputy General Manager Biomedical in JP Hospital. So last session he talked about the defibrillation concepts and the importance of defibrillator in the the hospital. Now, today he is going to talk about the selection criteria of the defibrillator in the hospital. To you, Mr. Sunil.
Thank you, Tarun. I request you to please load on the slide, the presentation.
Yes, I'm opening your slides.
Okay.
I hope
Okay,
it's
thank you.
visible now.
Yeah, it's visible. Okay. So, good evening, everyone, and good morning, everyone. And Tarun has given a very informative presentation on the advanced cardioversion techniques, defibrillation, capnography, and it was very informative. Now, in this session, I am trying to deviate a little. Deviate a little in the sense, last presentation and this presentation, we had gone through the typical technology aspects of defibrillation basics, advanced defibrillation, and etc. Now, in order to add to that, I am just making a scenario. I'm just give some guidelines. Giving you some guidelines on how we can select a device, right? Why the selection criteria is important? Because multiple people select the devices in multiple way. Now, if you look back around 22 years back, when we have started our careers, the role of a biomedical engineer or role of a biomedical manager in the hospital is limited to that location. Meaning, their role is only to do the internal repair, in-house workforce or internal repair activity. And then slowly when the time elapsed, then the management decided that, okay, when we have a biomedical engineer or a biomedical, let us have a group of biomedical people, let us start a biomedical department, so that we have a lot of equipments in the hospitals, and then why we need to give the service contract outside way when we have an in-house team. So they try to save the money, that so-called saving the money in that way. Later, the organizations understood that it is not just about the saving the money. The time is more important rather than simply doing lot of repairs in house and keeping the machine idle. Why can't we make biomedical engineers as biomedical managers so that they will manage the repair in a better way and they get the thing done by the other service providers? Then, of late, after 5-10 years later, then the typical the JCA accreditation, NABH accreditation came into picture, and the role of biomedical engineers also increased. They need to be mandatorily available in the hospital in terms of specific mandatory documents, specific mandatory calibrations, preventive maintenance, and all the upkeeping of all these things. Now, from that era onwards, for the last 5-10 years, the organizations are looking biomedical engineers as technology advisors or even business advisors. Now, this is a context. Now, from that way, let us carry forward and how we become from a biomedical engineer to a technology expert or a business advisor to the organization. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, coming to when you're talking about the business advisory role. Now, why we need to, how we take a technology or an equipment in the hospital? Tarun, can I have the second next slide?
I think it's showing technology network learning.
Okay, fine. Now, every technology, what we buy, technology means I am referring to any equipment. Let's have a generalized approach for every equipment, and then I will come back to the defibrillation, how we select a defibrillation. Now, everything requires a planning. Why do you require a planning when you buy a technology or when you replace a technology? Think about the general criteria wherein we buy an equipment. There are certain reasons when you're buying an equipment. Sometimes if your organization starts a new one, yes, obviously you buy some new equipments, so you'll do some planning. And then sometimes if you're starting a new facility, then again you will be adding new equipment. But there are certain occasions wherein we need to replace the technology or we add on the technology in the existing facility itself. At that point of time, we require a planning, how we need to buy the technology. Now, typically, when you simply look back and see the circumstances wherein you had ended up in buying an equipment or buying a technology, is like you can just think about a situation wherein you have an equipment for any matter for any equipment, and if it fails on a critical time, then you have a hue and cry say that yes, I may have to buy an equipment. Or sometimes, either clinician in your organization or doctor or a physician in your organization simply just go for a conference and coming back saying that, okay, I have gone a different conference, I have seen different equipments over there, my equipment in this organizations are out of use, I need to buy this thing. Actually, these are practical situations. These are not the way we plan in buying an equipment. Ideally speaking, or scientifically, we need to plan based on 4 parameters in terms of their need, in terms of the impact, in terms of the cost, and in terms of the benefit. The need means the need in terms of, if I buy this technology or if I buy this equipment, what is the clinical effectiveness? And second thing is, do I really need this equipment? And what are the safety features available in this equipment? That way we assess the need for that, particular technology or particular equipment. Now, second part is, the impact. Impact means you need to think upon, suppose if we buy this equipment, what impact it will hamper on my infrastructure or on my utilities. Utilities means I am referring to your HVAC, your electrical, your space, etc. Simple example, let me give you, someone tell you, I need to buy a, biochemistry analyzer in my lab. At that point of time, you need to see the impact on your utilities. Like you will be requiring, RO water connection. And when you have a water connection, you require a drainage over there. So these are the implication or the impact that creates on your facility. So you need to plan for that when you're buying that. And third is the cost. Of course, what is why we need to plan for the cost. But there are direct cost also and indirect cost also. Direct cost means the cost of acquiring the equipment, like the typical price of the equipment while you're paying, the price of the accessories, the price of the consumable. There can be some indirect cost also, meaning suppose if I buy this equipment or if I buy this technology, do I need to invest more on my manpower? Does my existing manpower or my technicians are trained enough or licensed enough to handle this equipment? Or do I need to acquire more staff so that I need to run this equipment? Then you need to think about the benefit you are getting by adding this equipment in terms of how much clinical productivity can be improved, what all additional procedures I can do about, and obviously what will be the additional income my organization is going to. So based on these 4 parameters, we plan whether it is required or not. Now, it is often said that, when the people are over there, it is always a concern that you just, go to the doctor and ask, the clinician and ask, what equipment you require, and then you buy accordingly. I will say there is nothing wrong in that, in listening to what they are saying, the clinicians are saying. But what is important is you listen to them, but don't try to echo what they say. You do your own homework before arriving at a conclusion. Now, these are about planning, but if you don't do the proper planning in need, impact, and cost and benefit, unfortunately, we end up in the underutilization of the technology, and whatever the technology you or the equipment you purchased or taken, that may not be utilized completely, or you may end up in buying extra accessories because you bought that equipment, and then after buying that equipment, then we came to know that, okay, I needed this much accessories also, so I have to buy extra accessories. So typically it will increase your purchasing cost by 30%. And believe me, the important thing is this particular planning, what I am talking about, will be unique to each and every organization. There cannot be a single way of planning which is okay for all organizations. Simple example, an equipment planning or the equipment plan for a primary care center will be different than that of a tertiary care facility. So equipment to, organization to organization, it is unique, is the planning. Next slide, please. Now, once you planned it, you understood that you require an equipment, and then you end up in the discussion with the possible providers. Next slide, please. Thank you. you end up in the discussion with the possible providers in terms of, saying what all things generally you discuss. You can have multiple discussions with them, but there are 4 or 5 things which mandatorily we need to discuss. The first one I should always say that the delivery schedule. Now, why delivery schedule is so much important? What is wrong in if someone is giving at a lower cost, but he delivers on a later date, and if someone is having a high cost and delivers in 1 month time, the delivery period is important. I'll try to explain you why delivery schedule is important. Because we had planned it as a capital equipment for buying that, and your organization has allocated some amount of money for buying that equipment, right? While allocating that money or while allocating that budget, the organization might also have thought that, okay, I have allocated this money to buying this equipment. Now, in this, as early as possible, if the equipment comes in, I can utilize it and I can get my revenue. And so that my operational expenses are supported. Got it? Which means that whatever you have planned, that same, the yield or the outcome of that equipment or the revenue, that should come in the same year itself. That is the reason why delivery schedule is important when you are discussing. The second and foremost important is the service delivery TAT. TAT means turnaround time. Believe in a situation wherein you have an equipment, you bought an equipment, and you need to understand how fast you will be getting a service in terms of a breakdown. For example, if someone buys an equipment at Himachal Pradesh in Kangra, and later they came to know that the services are provided only from Delhi, there is a transit distance of at least 20 hours from there to Delhi. So always try to go for someone who is able to provide better turnaround time. So you should always discuss about the service delivery TAT. Then obviously you should discuss about the service cost, which is after your warranty. Then the cost of typical spares, and more importantly, this availability of the spares and the end of life of this equipment. Underline that end of life of the product. Why this end of life is important? Because different manufacturers are making different equipments, and for years and years, they keep on updating this equipment, and over a period of time, some models they will discontinue. Now, in 2020, we are buying an equipment, and after buying that, we came to know that it is going to get discontinued in 2021. So what will happen? Obviously, your manufacturer may support you for another 3-4 years, but after that, you are not getting any spares. So while making a discussion, always make sure that the equipment what we are discussing is currently not discontinued, or at least for the next 1 or 2 years, the manufacturer doesn't have a plan to discontinue this device. Or you discuss them with saying that, okay, I need to get the service support and spare for the next 8 years. Now, the next one is the pre-installation requirement. Now, while we're discussing about the cost and everything, it is important to discuss about the pre-installation requirement. Pre-installation requirement means, if you recollect the example what I told you in the previous slide, that is, like, say, for example, if you're trying to buy a biochemistry analyzer in the lab, then you need to ask for what are the pre-installation requirement. They will tell you these are the pre-installation requirements, saying that you will be requiring a distilled water supply, and then you require the distilled water supply in this much pressure, this much flow rate, and accordingly these are the pre-installation requirement. And then they will tell you that, okay, this requires this equipment will be working on a single phase electricity or a 3-phase electricity. It requires a uninterrupted power supply. So based on this pre-installation requirement, before the equipment comes in, you need to coordinate with your EMS or engineering team or the project team to make sure that these pre-installation requirements are met, and obviously the environmental conditions also. Then the most important thing to discuss is the local service setup, which I have already covered. Like, unless you have a local service setup over there, with the manufacturer or with the dealer, you may not be able to get a better turnaround time for the equipment. Needless to say, all this discussion need to be a part of your agreement in writing. Next slide, please. Now, after discussing these essentials, we should come more towards the technology. We have still not taken the technology, right? So when it comes to the technology, you need to think in mind that the patient is the primary stakeholder for any technology, for any equipment that we use in a hospital in terms of its outcome. So safety of the device and safety of the patient, safety of the personnel using that equipment are foremost important. So you're always look forward the safety certification in terms of whether it is CE certified, whether it is FDA approved. So given a chance, always go for the equipments with the safety precautions, safety certifications only. And then based on this, we can do a cost optimization. Cost optimization doesn't mean that it is a cost cutting. It is something related to quality. The next slide, please. Now, we had planned about the technology or the equipment. We had selected the possible providers, and then we started the discussion. We discussed the essentials, turnaround time, delivery schedule, etc. And then we checked about the safety features. Now, really comes in how you evaluate a product, right? Now, if I simply ask a question, how you evaluate a product, everybody will come across, and at least 95% of the biomedical engineers will come across and say, yes, we will compare it technically. I agree to that. Now, comparing technically, if you see that, I will try to put it in a different way. This product evaluation or that need to be as a function of the requirement, which I told you earlier, the requirement of an equipment, the particular equipment for a tertiary care setup may not be the same of that same equipment in a primary care setup. You understand? So then you planned on to that, and then the same equipment you can, evaluate while getting it demonstrated, or if the equipment is bigger, you go into some different site and attend a demonstration. Then clinical trial, that means you can, consult with the different users or the doctors and how many, what is the utilization of this equipment. I mean utilization in the sense effectiveness of this equipment. Then you can go through the literatures. There are a lot of literature reviews available for each and every equipment. Check about the device history. Device history in the sense, you can check with the other organizations, and if you how fast this equipment requires a service, whether it is a serviceable or it requires frequent servicing. Then come to the technical parameters. Even though being a biomedical guy, I put the technical parameters as a last thing. You must be wondering why. I told you, there is a reason for that. Now, the common mistake, what I have seen in doing this comparison from the biomedical guys is they do, or rather we do, importance to the technical parameters, or rather only giving the importance to the technical parameters, forgetting about what actually we need to compare. I'll try to explain it. Being technical guy or being a biomedical, we can have, pages after pages of comparison on technical parameters. There are thousands of technical parameters for each and every equipment, right? Now, you can have a, Excel sheet of 100 pages and then saying that 100 line items you compare for equipment A, equipment B, manufacturer A, manufacturer B, and manufacturer C. And at the end of the comparison, what inference we are carrying forward, or what outcome we are getting, right? So after the technical, or in the simple word, how we are converting this technical comparison for a commercial decision making, right? Now, for that purpose, rather than compare, we need to understand what to compare. There is no point in comparing all the technical parameters of the equipment line by line. We need to understand what to compare, what are the technical parameters you typically wanted to compare, and then those only you compare, and then those comparison result you convert into a technical reasoning. Meaning, when you convert this technical comparison into a commercial reason, you will simply elevate yourself as a business advisor from just a technical expert. Next slide, please. Now, if you are emphasizing only on the technical parameters, if you're emphasizing only on the technical parameters, we will not be able to arrive at a conclusion. You will be simply saying that you have an Excel sheet with a 3 column with a company A, company B, company C. And here this parameter I compared, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. But at the end of that, so you have around 14 or 15 point you compared. And then how are we going to convey that which is better? Because I mean, there cannot be any reason wherein on one product will have everything low and everything high. You understand? There cannot be any good, good product or a bad product in medical device industry. There can only be a good product and a better product. There cannot be any bad product. So if you're emphasizing only on technical parameters, it will not lead anywhere. Now we need to decide upon what to compare. I'll try to give a simple example. Everybody buys a mobile phone. Now you guys buy a mobile phone and I buy a mobile phone. The basic system of using a mobile phone is like, I need to, I should be able to make and receive the calls and make and receive this thing. These are some basic requirement while used by the mobile phone. Now there are certain cameras and specifications, etc., coming on the mobile phone. Now, if I am buying a mobile phone, if I am a person who are not serious enough in taking the photograph, of course I will take a photograph for here and there. But if you are not that much serious enough in taking the photograph, there is no point in getting a 180 megapixel camera for me, for paying extra for me. So for me, I will not do a comparison on camera in that way. But at the same time, if you are a person who look photography as very important, for you the camera in a mobile phone specification is important, so you will compare in that way. The underlying statement what I am trying to say is like a same product comparison in two different organizations will not be the same. It all depends upon what is your requirement, and depending upon your organization's requirement, you find out what are the parameters you wanted to compare. Next slide, please. Just to give an example, since we have been discussing about defibrillators, now let me give you a product evaluation checklist for a defibrillator. Some mandatory things we need to compare in the defibrillator. Now, if you remember, in the previous discussions we had discussed about the the type, the way of doing the defibrillation, which is 1, 2, 3 method of defibrillation. So the first parameter what we are going to compare is like, we should compare is like, whether this defibrillator is having a easily identifiable control for 1, 2, 3. That means select energy, charge, and in a shock. That is number one. The number two, the faster charging time. Right now you must be knowing what crucial is important for the defibrillation. If you remember in the last slide, in the last presentation, we discussed about the importance of time in defibrillation, right? If you're able to defibrillate in the first minute, you have a better survival rate. If you're able to defibrillate in the last 10th minute, you have a least survival rate. So the time of defibrillation is important. So you need to have a faster charging time. The faster, typically, while selecting 200 joules of energy or device specific energy, within 5 seconds you should be able to charge. Now there can be an internal disarm facility. We will check whether there can be an easy switch over between the manual and AED mode. I don't name a product because a couple of years ago there was a product, defibrillation came across to me for comparison. It was again a very good multinational product, established product with all the safety features like US FDA, CE, and everything. But I was not able to take that defibrillator because this parameter, like the easily switch over between the manual and AED mode, was not available in that machine, surprisingly. Which means that machine, if you switch on that machine, it will simply boot on the AED mode by default, and then if I wanted to change it to manual mode, I have to wait for another 10 or 15 seconds for the complete booting. So every time when I switch on the machine, it will be typically going into the AED mode. Then I have to manually switch it over to the manual mode. Then I should be able to defibrillate. So by this procedure, my time of defibrillation is increasing, right? So in my criteria, that was important. So I was not able to take that. Now the fourth parameter we should discuss about is the battery backup available. So we should think, we should make sure that the equipment, the defibrillator what you're going to buy should have a battery, fully charged battery should have a battery backup of delivering minimum of 50 shocks of device specific energy. And the final specification or the product evaluation criteria is a non-invasive pacing, which we have discussed in the previous presentation. That will be that may not be mandatory, but as a reasonable choice, we can do that. Now, these are the product evaluation criteria for a defibrillator. So similarly, for each and every equipment, based on what is your the organization's requirement, whether it is a primary care, whether it is a secondary care, whether it is a tertiary care, you can devise upon your own specification criteria. Now remember, don't try to compare all the technical parameters. You select those parameters which are important for your organization and your ward. Right? Now we planned it, we discussed it, we discussed about the product evaluation, and now next slide, please. Now let us understand from whom we are going to buy that, which means that the selection of a technology partner. Generally, your purchase or the finance team generally talks about vendor, but believe me, when it comes to the medical equipment business, those are not vendors, they are your technology partners. And how you select a technology partner, so you understand that they have a product, so you evaluated the product, but from whom you are buying, that is also important. A best product in a worst hand is a worst scenario, right? So so you should always look about his reputation of that company and the past experience, whether they have been able to deliver it properly or not. Then comes the competency skill metrics. Competency skill metrics means, what is their service setup, how many engineers they have in your area, how many application specialists they have in your area, will be able to provide that way. Now, how many people are in that company who can provide a training for in terms of different level, training for your end users, in terms of nurses, the doctors, or the biomedical guys, that is important. Now, finally, the response time. Then service escalation metrics. This is something very tricky. The service escalation metrics means, generally speaking, now, in all the multinational companies, the products companies in Nihon Gordon or Philips or any companies, you might be having some call login numbers. You log in a call and then the call is registered, then you have a ticket number. So that is, you can track your complaint at any given point of time. If that is not resolved, that will get escalated. But believe a fact that, suppose if you are buying from a local company in the sense I am referring to a single person owned company which is available in some part of the country only. And whenever there is a problem, you call that person and you are dependent on him only. If his mobile is switched off, you don't have anybody to contact. So you are not in a position to escalate anything. So always look for a service escalation matrix. And finally, you discuss about the cost. Now this kind of a selection of a technology partner, now you are making you're not making a negotiation, you are making a strategic dialogue with them, so that that is how they become your technology partner. Now the next slide, please. So I'm going to sum up, in this discussion, what we have discussed about generalized criteria for selection of a device with an example of a defibrillator. Next slide, please. Example of a defibrillator and what is the importance of planning, and once you plan that, how you evaluate the device. Once you evaluate the device, how you what are the things you want to discuss, and what is the importance of technical parameters, and what are the technical parameters you need to compare, and then how you evaluate your technology partner, what are the discussions you will be having, and then or the idea is just to become, when you do this kind of activities, then you become I always talk about the business advisors. So always remember that our job as a biomedical is not always to select the best product. I'm saying our job is not always to select the best product. Rather, we try to find out the selection of a fit product. That means fitting to your recommendation, it means fitting to your organization's requirement and fitting to your cash budget within your available resources. And when we are able to do that, we become a situational expert. That's what my recommendation for this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sunil. Thank you for talking about giving your experience from your vast practical experience about selecting a product in a hospital. Okay, it's very useful for all the young biomedicals who are going to join the hospital. I think procurement agencies, how to select the product. There's a lot of juggling between the clinician side and from the company sides also, that which product push from the company side to they are there to buy the surgery product, but it's a decision of the biomedical or purchase to like which model or which go for which product. Thank you so much for telling. Please be on for some time. We will do the question and answer at last after
Sure.
Mr. presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Sunil, for nice presentation, and welcome you again for the BME consideration for defibrillator handling, the maintenance and the cleaning, disinfecting the equipment is a very important aspect of for a critical care device. So the agenda is calibration and validation, cleaning and disinfecting, accessories management, and maintenance requirement for a critical care device. What is calibration and what is validation? The difference is just the calibration ensures the measurement accuracy of an instrument compared to known standard at factory for medical device or fleet for some analytical instruments. But the validation ensures that the system satisfies the stated functional intent of the system. This can be done in the field with certain analyzers. So for defibrillator, we have a defibrillator analyzer. These analyzers can accept the energy delivered from defibrillator or the pedal. The pedal you can see here. There are two apex and a sternum pedals. So it has the energy selection. It has the energy deliver value for higher and lower energy levels and ECG waveform generation. So it has various function like a VF test. Usually a defibrillator is used to keep VF arrhythmia into a normal rhythm by giving a high value shock. So this defibrillator analyzer works as a patient which can generate various arrhythmia, including ventricular fibrillation, which is useful for a defibrillator to deliver the shock. So when we generate a VF through this analyzer, it will give a VF waveform in the defibrillator, and that after delivering the shock through certain selected energy level on defibrillator, it will show a normal rhythm. That means it has passed the VF test. The cleaning and disinfection is the very important part for any medical device and the health of the user as well as the health of the service who provides the service to for medical device. So first of all, before attending any medical device service, it is mandatory to clean hand with soap and water or use a sanitizer before handling any medical device. So wear the hand gloves, face mask before handling medical device, because the medical device is a device which is kept inside the ICU, inside the OT, inside the emergency area, and various patients are moving, come out and go very frequently. So cleaning is very important, and disinfecting those medical device is a major aspect for a proper hygienic condition. So there is a possibility the outer surface of the device or consumable like cuff or SpO2 probe, EtCO2 sensor cables can be contaminated with contagious germ. So disinfect and clean device before servicing it, sending it to or any distributor place, or sending it to factory if required. So do not throw disinfectant directly over the device. Just as you can see in the image, the accessories are being cleaned with the moist cloth or tissue paper, which is deep in disinfectant, and it is cleaned properly. So why I am saying, because if you throw the disinfectant over a medical device, it is possible that the microgranules of that solution can go inside the device and may react with the various parts like a PCB and LCD screen, which can damage those things. So to disinfect device, use non-abrasive cloth moist with any of the disinfectant listed below, easily available in the hospitals. Avoid using acidic solution. Check pH level to avoid damage to any device. So the list of disinfectant which can be easily available at hospital or in the market. As you can see that chlorohexadiene gluconate, it should be 0.5% in 70% alcohol. Benzethonium chloride 0.2%, glutaldehyde 2.0%. It is also very easily available. Benzalkonium chloride 0.2%. This percentage is specifically given here because it should not exceed, or it may damage the device enclosure or the part which you are cleaning after longer time. So that's why this much disinfectant content in alcohol of 70% is sufficient to disinfect the medical device. So medical device has accessories, and to managing the accessories is also very important. So to manage that accessories, clean, in case of defibrillator, clean pedal plates after every use to avoid oxidation on the contacts. Because the gel has various pH level which is used for ultrasound, for ECG. So usually for this case, defibrillator, you have to use an ECG gel, and till the ECG gel lying on the defibrillator pedal, the pedal should be kept, as you can see in the image, on the holders, both the sides of the pedal pedal socket. So use the edge of each pedal holder to temporarily hold the pedal so that contact gel does not get on the defibrillator. These holders can only be used for adult electrode plates. In continuation with accessories management, the cables are also important part of a defibrillator. Clean and check cables, no cracks on spiral coil. You can see spiral coil in this image. These two are the spiral coil which goes to apex and sternum of the pedal assembly. It should not be cracked, or it should not have any wire cut. Otherwise, it can give shock to the user also. So it should be clean and it should not be cut. Another thing is clean and check ECG cable, the pad adapter. The pad adapter is being used for AD or AD pads or a pacemaker, and it should also does not have a crack, as it can avoid the shock or noise in the waveform. Immediately replace it. Battery is a very important part of a defibrillator. It is the soul of the defibrillator. So to prevent battery trouble, check battery appearance every 6 months. The check schedule should be written on the battery check label attached to the defibrillator. Check the outside appearance of the battery pack. If there is any damage, crack, deformation, cable discontinuity, and so on the battery, or the battery leaks, replace the battery with the new one. If the battery is dirty, with dust, remove it. In extension to the maintenance requirement, as I have shown you in the last presentation of 2B, there are some symbolic marks on the defibrillator that refer manual before operating defibrillator at various location on the front panel, on the side panel, which shows the exclamation mark. So this need to be fixed properly as guided in the operation manual. And to maintain the good contact between the electrode and the skin, check that the paste of the disposable electrode is not dry. Why? Because we use gel to reduce the impedance of the skin, because some dry skins has a high impedance and the shock delivered to the patient is not proper. So the dryness on the pedal or dryness of the skin can be removed by applying proper gel. When the contact of the display electrode becomes poor, replace the electrode with a new one immediately. Otherwise, contact impedance between the skin and increases and correct ECG cannot be obtained. So these are the very small but very important criteria while using defibrillator and maintaining the defibrillator. So as we discussed last time, that power cord should be 3 prong long, no deformation on the metallic part. The external pedal should not be damaged. Accessories and cables should be properly cleaned and no cracks found on those cables. Battery should not be damaged. Pedal plate should be clean. So this I am repeating again because this is very important. It plays a very important role for proper functioning of defibrillator. Otherwise, if the pedal plates are put as it is after longer time, it has a oxide layer, the green layer you can see, or a black layer you can see over the contact. This is because the pedals are not cleaned properly while after use. Again, equipment should be serviced by qualified service personnel only. Call in case of Nihon Cordon on the toll-free number and the customer_support ID. And thank you very much for keeping patience and listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukesh-san, for your presentation. Now I'm opening a Q&A session, question and answer session. I hope Mr. Sunil, you are on line.
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Okay, so there is a question from Abhinav Garg. He is asking how defibrillator acquire the ECG without ECG cable through the 2 pedals, same as in AED. Can you explain it, sir? Okay. So Mr. Sunil, you will answer or my? Okay, Abhinav, same as in case of AED, the pedals, AED pads are, are able to recognize the ECG of the patient. They can acquire the ECG signal. The same for pads also, the external paddles. So they are, designed in such a way so they can acquire the ECG signal of the patient. Okay, so we are when we are attaching the attaching the pads, external paddles on the patient chest. So we are, applying some jelly. So that jelly is, to reduce the resistance, and those pedals are designed in such a way that they can record the ECG signal. And sometimes we need to give the synchronized cardioversion, and it's in emergency. So with the same pedals also, like external pedals, we can synchronize the cardio ECG, and we can give a shock. Okay, so there is a question, I think, from this list. Is the Make in India concept involved in the selection criteria? Most of the international brands are competitive, however, with the same features. If it is Indian make, what will be the important criteria will you set?
Well, I'll try to answer that. Like, it's a good initiative that we have a Make in India program. But at the same time, I will always, sting around to the fact that for any technology, for any device, as I always say, the patient is the primary stakeholder, right? So how safe is that device? So if that device is safe, no matter whether it is manufactured in India or Brazil or any part of the world, if it is passing the safety criteria, then there is no point in taking that. But given the fact that we have a product available here, manufactured in our country, but unfortunately it has not cleared the safety guidelines, then my recommendation is I will not do that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sunil. Okay, so there is a question from the Shibin P. What's the maximum energy we can deliver through defibrillator? So, Shibin, it depends on which defibrillator technology you're using. Whether you're using monophasic defibrillator or you're using the biphasic defibrillator. So nowadays, biphasic are being used, and for each manufacturer has they defined the energy level for their product. If you see, there is a marking also, like for our non-coded product, 150. If you want to deliver the energy to the adult patient, so it's we have to start from the 150. The next shock is available is 200 joules. Then next available shock is a 270 joules. So in the case patient is not getting VF is not getting restored with the 200 joules, then there is a facility is there for can give a shock of 270 joules to the patient. Okay, so it depends. All depends on the patient body impedance also. Okay, so if patient body mass is the thick body mass is there, then I think in that case with the biphasic also the maximum energy which is recommended by the AHA is 200 joules. So you should start with 200 joules. Then if next energy level available like a NOS 270 joules, so you can give a shock with 270 joules. It's the question from Mr. Nadeem Waris. How to clean black spot on the surface of paddles? So, Mr. Mukesh.
Yeah. So the black spot is because the pedal plates are of some specific make. It could be a silver layer coating, nickel silver, or some silver coating. So this happens. First of all, we have to understand why the black spot is happening on the pedals. So as I mentioned in my presentation, the jelly is placed on the pedals, and because of this, there could be some oxide layer could be present, and this oxide layer could be green color or could be black color. It depends on the pedal material, what kind of material is being used. If it is black color, it is because the silver coating layer was there on side above the pedal plates, and it can be cleaned with any like acidic solution or mild solution for including that alcohol to clean that surface, because the silver can be the black spot can be removed. If still you cannot remove, then you need to replace the pedal. Small pedals plates you can remove.
Thank you, Mukesh. Next question is from Mr. Mohammad Shakir. He's asking difference between monophasic and biphasic. Okay, so Mr. Mohammed, if you have attended our last session, so in last session we discussed about the monophasic defibrillators and biphasic defibrillator. So yeah, you can see, you can refer to the session 2 videos, and for this time I can answer you. Monophasic, as the word say, it's a single phase. So we are attaching two pads over the patient chest, one is on the apex, and second is on the sternum. So in the monophase, the current phase, which we are we are giving the energy, the current moves from the goes from the apex to the sternum. In the biphasic is two-way, so it goes from the apex to sternum and sternum back to the apex. Okay. So this is the difference between the monophasic and biphasic defibrillator. This question from Mr. Manu Mohan: can we use pads instead of pedals for cardioversion? Yes, Mr. Mohan, you can use the both pads or pedals for cardioversion. Nadeem Waris is saying it's creating with a self-test of defect. I don't know what's creating. Next question is from Mr. Roger. Is gel applied before charging or after? Okay. See, you can apply it before charging, okay, or after. No, in other way, I think it's better if you apply the jelly before charging. No, if you apply it before charging also, then there is the shock, the capacitor is not discharged, so it will not harm you. So you can apply later on, but it's recommended you should apply the jelly before you charge the defibrillator. Question from Mr. Vijay. How switching between manual and automatic effects in a sequence of CPR, and also how it's related in device selection.
Can you repeat that?
How switching between manual and automatic affects in a sequence of CPR, and also how it's related in device selection.
Okay, fine. Now, two parts of that question. One is that how it improves the effects in the CPR. Now, during CPR, once you switch on the defibrillator, anyway you are not switching off the defibrillator, so it may not affect you, because during CPR the chain of survival link is early access, early CPR, early defibrillation. Third link is early defibrillation. So idea is you should be able to defibrillate it as early as possible. So once you give one shock, then you're not switching off the device and you're keeping it idle. So it will not give any effect. But now the second part of the question is why it is important in doing the selection of the device. I think I have explained that in my presentation itself, that the time is very important in while giving the defibrillator. And now imagine a condition wherein you have a defibrillator kept on your ward. Suddenly one patient nearby that the bedside the patient has collapsed and he or she requires a defibrillation immediately. Ideally we should be able to defibrillate as fast as possible, right? Now if it is not feasible for to selection between the manual or to the AED mode very easy way, so we will be tingling around and saying that okay, let us go to the manual mode, or if it is booting onto the AED mode, okay, let us come back to the manual mode. Then you are actually wasting the time. So every minute we waste over there counts. So that is the reason why I'm saying that it should be easily identified, easily switchable between the manual and AED mode, because these two are being used by two different category of people. AED typically is being used by the layman, not the trained paramedics. Manual defibrillation generally used by the, or rather recommended to use by the healthcare providers only. So when the defibrillator is in the hand of a healthcare provider, ideally speaking, he should be able to select an energy level which he desires, right? So that switching over is very important.
Thank you, Mr. Sunil. The question is from Mr. Avinav again. So at least 3 contracts required to acquire any ECG signal. How it come from 2 pedals? Please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, Avinav, if you remember, we are attaching 2 pads. One is on the sternum side and one is on the apex side. So it's a bipolar lead we are using. If you remember the, lead 2. So lead 2 comes from R and L. Okay, R and F, sorry. So it acting it works in a similar way as RF electrode works in ECG. So we are measuring the lead 2 with the 2 pedals. Question is from Subramaniam. If the patient is connected with the AED pedal and patient gets suddenly pulse dropped, can the machine give shock? If the patient is connected with the AED pedal, AED pads and patient gets suddenly pulse dropped. Question is see, it depends on the if patient is having the ventricular fibrillation or it's a ventricular tachycardia. So if patient needs, if his machine analyzes that patient needs shock, then only it will ask it will charge itself and ask for the press the shock button. So dropping the pulse, it doesn't mean that patient needs the defibrillation. Okay, it should be the ECG signal should be it should be the shockable rhythm. Then only machine will charge itself and ask for the press the shock button. Question from Mr. Roger. Is button pressed during shock or just putting the pads? Okay, see there is a button for pressing for the shock button is there. After attaching the pad, the AED will analyze the ECG signal and it will, if shock rhythm is there, it will charge itself and it will say go back. Okay, it will charge and then you need to press the shock button. Okay, I'm now opening the question and answer section. It's, earlier it was on the chat box. What is sync means? Okay, sync means the synchronization. Okay, so we have discussed about synchronized cardioversion. So sync abbreviation stands for synchronized. Question from Lijina Manjuthu. Where is the location of pads for transcutaneous pacing? Three location of pads are similar to the location of in the AED. One pad is attached to the sternum side and one pad is attached to the apex side. Question from Vaira Manikam Maruthai. How to check the fixed and demand mode pacing output in defibrillator? How much output of milliamperes and pulse per minute? Okay, see, first, if you are giving pacing to the patient in the fixed mode and demand mode, then if it is pacing pulse is going to the patient, then you can see the patient heart rate is increasing. For example, it was a patient own heart rate was around 30, and you have started giving the current to the patient, milliamperes to the patient. So the patient heart rate will go up. Okay, you can see the 40, 50, and whatever you have set, it will go up to that level. Okay, so you can see on the defibrillator screen itself that ECG patient heart rate is increasing, and it means that you are giving your whatever current you are giving from the pacing, it is working, and you can see the pacing mark. If you are in the ECG lead on the display, it will show you the pacing mark. I think you can get the confirmation from there also that pacing is being delivered to the patient. And with the indicator also on the defibrillator panel, so that indicator will also blink when the pacing is given to the patient. What is the risk factor of defibrillator for the patients who implanted by pacemaker or artificial heart? Mr. Sunil, you answer.
Can I have the question again, please?
Yeah. What is the risk factor of defibrillator for the patient who is implanted by pacemaker or artificial heart?
Okay, so this is like, there are certain contraindications generally recommended by AHA. So generally they say that, for the patients implanted with the pacemaker, it's a contraindication. Contraindication means it doesn't harm the patient, but obviously there can be, it can damage the functioning of pacemaker also. So what AHA says is like, if that patient goes into ventricular fibrillation, no matter whether he has got implanted pacemaker or not, that is the only way to recover him is defibrillation. So first you defibrillate, then you find out check about the functionality of the pacing. That's how they say it. But otherwise they say that, it may hamper with the functioning of the pacemaker, but provided if it is a ventricular fibrillation, you must. And the second part was what? Artificial heart, right? Yeah. The same is the case with the artificial heart. But when it comes to the artificial heart or LVAD, the left ventricular assisted device, the need of defibrillation may not arise over there, right? Because the artificial heart itself is like, it is a left ventricular assisted device. Why the defibrillation is required? The defibrillation is required when your ventricles are not able to get a synchronized contraction and relaxation, and mechanical activity is not happening, and you have a chaotic activity. So that is the reason why we are giving a shock. So when you have an LVAD device or the artificial heart, the chances are minimal. So I don't think there is any chance for a defibrillation comes in for LVAD. But again, given the fact that if at all that comes as a ventricular fibrillation, no matter, we have to deliver. That is it.
Yes. So next question from Kajal. I think I want you to answer this. Do any graduated instrumentation engineer has future scope in this biomedical field jobs? And if not, then what we can do to get in biomedical field or biomedical instrumentation?
All right. So that was a very difficult question. That is the reason why you put me to answer onto that, or what?
That's why you want to answer.
Okay. Let me answer to that. See, ideally speaking, let me start with ideal scenario, then I will answer to your question. Ideally speaking, we always say that a biomedical graduate should come for the biomedical job. The reason being is like, it doesn't mean that an instrument engineer cannot do anything. Simple example, I have a team of a group of engineers, and I have instrumentation guys also working with me. The problem, I will not say problem, the limitation is the time required for training a instrumentation person onto the biomedical will be little more. The reason being is like, the biomedical guys, we understand that they have undergone some theoretical studies about during their colleges. So they know, or rather they are supposed to know about the normal functioning of a device. So when they know about a normal functioning of the device, it is easy for them to understand what is the abnormal functioning of the device. So that is actually basically the complaint means abnormal functioning of an equipment. Now, when an instrumentation background person comes in, we may have to train him on the normal function also, and then he had to learn on the abnormal functioning. So there is nothing wrong in coming into the biomedical field. There are certain, specific courses. I think Punjab University has got a 6 months diploma program for biomedical kind of stuff. That is possible. So if anyone opting for biomedical, there is nothing wrong onto that. But some organization always prefer say that, okay, we require the biomedical graduates only. So it is organization dependent. But if you specifically ask to me as a person, if you are asking to Sunil George, my way of, or rather my organization, how is looking at it is like, see, if you are an instrumentation engineer, whether you have a zeal for knowledge, whether you are interested in the medical equipment technology, are you ready to learn new things? If all these things are yes, then we will say, okay, fine, we can consider. I think I have done little bit of, justice in answering on to that?
Yes, definitely. I think it depends on the, the person who has, question, what he
Correct.
has in the mind. Okay. Yeah. So I think we have, we have answered lots of question, and still there are many questions. So I would like to, just like we discussed in the beginning, that we will upload the video on unanswered questions. So I think we are in at 6:35. So what, Mr. Sunil, you want to, continue with the question and answers, or you want to,
It all depend upon you, but before going to the question answer, I think I just need to answer one part of one query, because there was one query which was obviously answered by Mukesh. It's about some gentleman asked about the black colored spot coming onto the pads of the defibrillator and what to do that.
Yeah, please.
Now Mukesh has given a very good explanation how to do that, but I am trying to find out why that black mask marks coming in. There can be the silver. He has referred to the silver coating. Yes, at the same time, that particular person should also check about the environmental condition. The environmental condition means the black spots are always a little bit worrying. Worrying in the sense it is something like the silver content has been eaten up. The silver content, how it is getting eaten up is like, say for example, certain parts, especially the area where I am situated, you have the sulfur content maximum in the atmosphere. You have the sulfur content in the atmosphere, the atmospheric water vapor, or rather the typically the moisture, if the moisture content is also high, that will sediment as sulfuric acid, and those sulfuric acid in smaller portions can damage your parts. So that typically happens when you have a gold plated contacts or silver plated contacts, that will get eaten up. So if that particular engineer is facing that problem with other devices also, I better suggest him to evaluate what you call air quality analysis for that area, for that organization.
Thank you, Sunil. I think you have faced this issue in your hospital, I think. So, because
obviously I am sitting in Noida, so almost all the things are available over here.
Yes, yes. Okay. Just answer. Okay, sir. Abhinav question is there from Ms. Abhinav. I think let's answer that. If a healthy person get a defib shock accidentally, what will be happen to that patient? So I think if the patient, any normal person, get a shock, so he may go to the ventricular fibrillation, I think. So
exactly.
It's a high DC current shock. So from the sinus rhythm, the patient may go to the ventricular fibrillation, and then he needs another shock to get recovered. Okay, in case of CTVS, how much you will prefer? What about pads?
Come again?
In case of CVTS, I think cardiovascular surgery, how much you will prefer? What about pads? So, okay.
Maybe it is referring to the internal paddles during the surgery. Okay.
Yes,
so during the surgery, we need to understand one thing, like why we are selecting the energy, because the energy is required to push a current. It should pass the transthoracic impedance of the body, means the impedance offered by the skin, impedance offered by the hairs, impedance offered by the fatty layer, and then the ribs, and then the outer cover. Now, when you do surgery, open heart surgery or CVTS surgery, all these impedances are practically zero because you are directly accessing the heart. So the current required to overcome these impedances are very minimal. You don't require that. So meaning, when it comes to the internal paddle selection, you don't require a 150 joules or 200 joules of energy. You may hardly require 10 joules or 15 joules of energy, because there is no impedance over there.
Thank you. I think we are over with the questions. There is one, question. I think it's a service related. Can we find capacitor bank from the local market if suddenly dead? See, Mr. Nabi, we should not use the local capacitor. Then please, Mr. Sunil, want to write?
I think I think I should answer on to that because see, things are available anywhere. Again, why we are using it? Because it is a life-saving, life-supporting device, and it has passed through certain safety guidelines. And those safety guidelines are not simply on that equipment cover itself. Each and every product or each and every part of that product has gone for the safety testing. Now, if we bypass that, and if I say, for example, I am sitting in Noida, and so I can get hundreds of electronic components in the Nehru market and everywhere. So if I replace something and get something over there, initially it may work, but that aspect, if it is questioning the life of a patient, I say that we should not do that.
Yeah.
When it comes to the internal parts of that, now you should always prefer to the manufacturer recommended original parts only.
Yes. So we should recommend, also, service should be done by the trained service engineer or the trained biomedical.
Correct. Authorized person.
Yeah. So, okay. So last question we are answering is from Mr. Vijay. What is door to balloon time actually? So Vijay, actually door to balloon time is as defined by the AHA. It's door to balloon time should be less than 90 minutes after patient has a heart attack. So door to balloon time should be less than 90 minutes. So within 90 minutes, the patient should get gone through the angioplasty or the perfusion therapy procedure. We should be given some drugs or we should be given some angioplasty or gone to the balloon for angioplasty. I think we have answered most of the questions and I cannot find there any other questions left. So thank you, Mr. Sunil, and thank you, Mr. Nitesh Naruri, for arranging this session for us. Thank you so much. So we are closing the session for now, and same time for all attendees. We will on next 11th of December, next Friday, at the same time 5 o'clock. So we will start our next session. So on the ECG. So defibrillator we are closing for today, and from next week we will talk about the patient monitoring parameters. So starting with the ECG, and then on the next Friday, 18th of December, we'll talk about SpO2.
Thank you very much.
So, yeah. Thank you everyone. Thank you so much for joining with us. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you, Mr. Nitesh.